Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. And today we're talking about customer and end user focus. And I've got three excellent guests to join me to talk about that. But first, let's let them introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with you, Nick, if I may, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nick de Voil. I've been doing business analysis since the 1990s, or maybe even longer. I'm very involved with the BA community in the UK. I speak at BA conferences, and I was on the board of IIBA's UK chapter for 8 years. But I also do other things. So I'm very much into user experience. I wrote a book about it called User Experience Foundations. I've also been a project manager and a product manager, and I was a developer for several years. And because I run my own business, I'm often doing more than one of those simultaneously. So that gives me maybe a slightly different perspective. And as well as that, I train people in business analysis and user experience and all those other things. So yeah, the subject we're here to talk about really brings all those threads together, I think. So really pleased to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And as you say, yeah, absolutely brings everything together. So I look forward to talking about that in a moment. Matt, over to you, please.
Thanks, John. So I'm Matt Dean. I've recently moved into a business analysis management role. I started off life in a customer service role. So I feel like I've been a user of the sort of products and things that we often ask change and developers to build. So I've got a good sort of understanding and foundation for what's required here. I spent a lot of time in product roles. So I've been a product owner. I've looked at a lot of QA and testing. And yeah, I'm really always super on the side of helping the customer and the end user to make sure they get what they need and that anything we deliver can be used in the most efficient way possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. And Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola. I've been a business analyst for 5 years. I've been a BA finalist twice, and both of the premise of those was that everything I do is user-centric. It just seems to be my bread and butter that I think about people first. Externally, I am a YBA volunteer, and I'm currently working as a business analyst.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicola. All right. Excellent. And what was obvious from that those introductions as well is that everybody brings a slightly different perspective, and mainly as well that we've all been users or customers of different things at some point. So we certainly bring that perspective as well. So look forward to the conversation. But let's start then. I'll start with Nick first for this one. Why is it important that we consider the needs of the customer and the end user when we're conducting business analysis, Nick?
Well, so I think if we think about business analysis, what are we there for? We're there to investigate a business situation, to identify solutions, and to help to turn those solutions into reality. So we look at the first part of that, investigating a business situation. A business situation, what's it made up of? It's made up of people primarily. They're the most important thing, and people have their own goals, they have their own objectives, they have the tasks they're trying to carry out, they've got constraints they're working within, and so on. And every individual or group of people, they've all got their own perspective. And ultimately, it's the people that will determine the success of what you're doing. And any business is there to serve its customers. So, you better understand what they need. But the second part, identifying solutions, I always say that a business analyst is a designer. That sometimes that surprises people, but as a business analyst, you are a designer. You're designing business systems. And again, one of the most important sorts of element in a business system is the people. So if you want to put in place something that's actually going to work and be a success, you really need to take the people seriously all the way through the process. Really, that's the way I see it.
Perfect, thanks, Nick. And I mean, certainly that echoes why I thought this was such an interesting topic because it's so fundamental to what we do as business analysts. Matt, I'd like to hear your perspective on that, please.
Yeah, I agree with everything Nick's just said. I think as well, one of the key things for me is that we're often trying to fix a problem. that problem has normally been, summarized to the point where we've got the budget to build something and try and fix these problems. So for me, what it's really about is, it's about being able to ensure that those problems are covered with any solution that you implement. Quite often the problems are quite wide and varied, so there'll be a lot of different people who have different things going on. So for me, it's really about covering all of those business problems and ensuring that your solution is widespread enough to fix some of the smaller things and some of the bigger things. And in that, I would include process and user experience, and quite often it comes out in your data and your reporting as well, because a lot of the problems that I tend to find people are fixing often are data issues, and these are things that can't be found within core systems now. So you end up creating these fantastic solutions really that you could fix with just a simple piece of data or something like that. So for me, the point of involving your customer and your end user fully in this is to ensure that all of your problems are fixed.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. And Nicola.
I think it's hard to actually add anything onto that because both points are really well made and I completely agree with everything. I think that one thing that I would add is, as business analysts, we're often, exactly as you said, Matt, we're often identifying a problem, finding something to solve, or a business has asked us to implement something. And if you're not considering the end user, if the end user isn't actually going to use the solution, or if you've defined a problem that won't actually solve anything, then there isn't actually any point in doing it. You'd just be wasting your time, wasting money, and wasting effort. And I think if you consider the end user as you move through the process, and they're happy with the end process, you can often use that feedback to understand what they will want in future and start predicting customer needs in the future. And it actually helps you build your business up a little bit more. And yeah, it makes it a little bit more user centric and means that they're happier and you're building that trust with them. And yeah.
And I think to that extent, Nicola, as well, I mean, it's really, BA profession is like any other service or profession that's out there, in that if you're not thinking about your customers, the people that are going to use the products, like those services and those organizations, things are going to fail. You're going to deliver something, but it won't be appropriate for the people that you're trying to deliver for, I would say.
Exactly.
So yeah, so excellent points made there.
Sorry, John, just quickly,
Yeah,
that's really relevant with with reputation as well. Specifically when you're out trying to fix these solutions, you want end users to have a good relationship with them so that your reputation is good for when you do these things again in the future.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, I think it's quite easy sometimes to think about the product that we're delivering, the project we're delivering as well. But I think it's also important to think about the analysis we're delivering as a product, so that people that are going to consume that analysis can actually consume it in the way we want them to, and it's easy for them to consume it, and it's convenient rather than being a massive pain to review what we've done as well. So that's all I can add to what the three of you done an excellent job of introducing that. I wonder, perhaps Matt, if I can ask you then, is how do as BAs do we fully understand the needs of our users and the end users? Oh, Matt, you're on mute. Pop yourself on mute, Matt.
Sorry, John, my internet just cut for a second.
That's all right. So the question there was really, how do we ensure that we fully understand the needs of our end users and of our customers as BAs? And it was to you.
Sure. Yeah, look, there are lots of different ways of doing this, and I think for me, lots of the ways that I've done this in the past, you can get into some fairly generic ways of measuring things, and I've used sort of things like personas and things like that to try and understand, albeit that's a really good tool. Sometimes it doesn't quite fit the niche. So a lot of the time we'll try and break those things down a bit further. We've also used a fair amount of sort of data analysis in the past to try and understand what it is that people need. I've mentioned data a few times. I'm a bit of a data fanatic, so I'll always try and use it where possible. I think if you can quite often look at the data, you can see what's actually going on.
So when we're talking about fully understanding BA's needs, I will generally try and do this upfront in a project to make sure that, you avoid scope creep or the needs change, or if they do change, you can understand why. And I generally try to do this by understanding what the key pain points are. So you can, I think Matt, you already mentioned sort of user personas and utilizing those. It really helps you understand what actually is the issue that they're trying to solve and how do they genuinely feel about the problem or the solution. Or if you start with that, you can kind of go forward and understand how they work through their day to day, and it kind of leads on through the rest of the analysis and the rest of the project. And I think that if you start by fully understanding that need, it means that the end solution is something again that they'll actually use. And you can kind of almost I'm trying to find the word, but you can almost change the way that you're working and adapt to your approach is the word I was using, to try and figure out what goal they want you to achieve. And again, you're building that trust with them and you're making sure that they feel heard and they know that somebody's listening to the problems and somebody genuinely cares and wants to help. Which is always good to have your stakeholders on side and have your end users on side.
And it demonstrates there that the most obvious technique and approach we have is really just taking the time to take interest in the stakeholders we work with, to listen to them, and actually most of what they're saying probably we can empathise with to a degree on a human level anyway. We may not understand the intricacies of their product, but we can certainly understand the equivalence of some of their pain points or why some of the opportunities that they foresee really could be beneficial to them as well.
Exactly. And if you use that as the baseline, you can just build the knowledge and the rest of it on top. So, yeah.
That's it. I find as well that as you're talking, it reminds me that I think just by really having that real view of what the customer is, who the end users are, really adds that sort of like sense of ownership and being that really representative of the business as well. It's so helpful to be able to talk to stakeholders or technology as an example and really know why you're representing the business, because you can think of that individual on the line or in the process that's having real problems day to day, that hopefully by fixing these things you can help them out.
Exactly.
Some excellent points, Nicola. As you tell, you sort of inspired me on certain points there to chip in.
I'm glad.
Over to you, please.
Yeah, I think those points Nicola was making were are really important, and that brings me on to something that I'm always on about, which is the stakeholder analysis using a power and interest grid. So that's something that a lot of business analysts are trained in these days. The idea with the power and interest grid is that you measure the degree of power that each stakeholder group has, and you measure the degree of interest that they have. And then you decide which ones you're going to take seriously and which ones you're going to pay attention to. If you look at the stakeholders in the bottom right-hand corner of the power and interest grid, these are stakeholders with a low degree of power and influence, but they have some interest or a high degree of interest in what you're doing. And typically, those are your customers and your end users. Those will tend to be the people that you put in that corner of that diagram. Now, what we're often told is that we need to keep those people informed. Now, I don't really agree with that. I don't think keeping those people informed is good enough. I think you need to do a lot more than that. I think you need to make people feel that they are being consulted, because people don't like having change done to them without feeling that, they own the change, as Nicola was saying. People need to feel that they own it. So even if, as a business analyst, you're going to be guided mostly by those powerful and influential people that are higher up in the grid, I still think you need to put a lot of effort into talking to those people in the bottom right-hand corner and making them feel that they're being consulted. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with a sort of uphill struggle later on. to get them to accept this thing that you've cooked up behind closed doors and they don't really know anything about. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would agree. It makes me think as well that you can combine that power influence grid with a RACI so that you can make sure that even though there's individuals without that, perhaps that influence, as we said, but they have the interest, to make sure they are consulted, and we're reflecting the fact you're speaking to the end users as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the personas point was possibly slightly off point, but I would still stand by that. That's a tool that we've used before in the past. Now, for me, this answer is all about being with stakeholders, spending good time with stakeholders, and making sure that you really understand everybody and what they need. So it's about having really good relationships and actually having good sort of influencing skills. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed this before, but quite often just having a good relationship with a stakeholder is often enough to elicit a lot more information than if you go in cold and if you don't know somebody. So I've actually spent a lot of time with stakeholders, getting to know them personally, knowing the things they like, being able to talk at their level. And what this has helped me to do is have more common conversation where we can sit down, talk for 10 or 15 minutes generally about the state of play, life, football, you name it. And then we can have an easy conversation about the tech and try and really unearth any problems that exist within that user experience. And I can give you some really good examples of this with lots of sort of data and reporting solutions that we've built in the past. Quite often you'll have hundreds of data tables across lots of different places in reports. And quite often these things are really useful for a lot of stakeholders, but for some people, they just don't work at that level. They're more visual, or they prefer things in a different way. So what I actually like to do, especially when I can build close relationships, is shadow someone through their user experience, watching them click through and find what it is they like, how often they click certain things, and where they actually go to within that user experience. And we can then create user surveys and user polls to find out if our whole audience like doing it in that way. And quite often this is a really good way to create a consensus view of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and make sure that you can understand the full expectation from all stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think that point there about really involving and engaging with stakeholders, really learning about them and how, not just how they use the system and how they go through the process, but I suppose their mentality as they approach those activities, or their frustrations as well, or in some cases, a lot of people that might be on the line or they're doing an activity at present or a job at present, it isn't always their first job, so they may well come with experience of how it's been done better somewhere else. And I think building that rapport is a good way to extract that information and for them to want to share it as well.
Absolutely.
Just to add on to that as well, I find that really interesting, because if you're getting to know your stakeholders and the people who are doing the testing, you'll know what mood they're in. So you'll be able to kind of say if they're in a bad mood, they're less likely to have the same amount of patience, for example. So they might not click as many times. So I think that's really interesting.
And I guess it's a nice way as well. If they're in that bad mood, as you say, potentially it's just a direct result of some lack of features or functionality or poor part of the process day to day. So I think it's probably a useful time to try and engage the stakeholder rather than avoid them, and perhaps try and get to the bottom of why they're feeling frustrated to an extent anyway, if we can. Almost makes me think that we step into that role sometimes of counsellor, and I think we probably do to a small degree, but maybe that's one for another day. Anyway, I suppose just the thing that naturally occurs to me as well, based on what Nicola and Matt were saying, and Nick as well, is really just not just involving the user and the end user as part of your conversation and extracting their requirements and understanding the way they work, but also engaging them and including them in the design of the solutions as well, from wireframing and creating prototypes to really get into their mindset of what they would expect to see from any solutions, how they might like to do it, etc. I think that's some really useful insight, and bringing them along as the solution evolves to get them to give first-hand feedback on whether that is fit for purpose or whether they'd like to see any improvements, can really start to generate some insight, and not only fixes their pain points, but maybe realizes some broader opportunities to do more than just the pain points as well. I think beyond that, I think another natural approach as well, and probably drifting into techniques here, is to start thinking about traceability as well. And I think that's a useful way of just making sure that those insights we got from our users in terms of what they wanted and what the brief is, that we cover it, and we've not forgotten it when we introduce solutions as well, I would say. So that sort of naturally occurs. And conveniently as well, puts us onto a question around techniques and BA techniques specifically. So we've talked about approaches in the last question. In terms of any particular techniques, I know there's been a few mentioned already. I think Matt, for example, we mentioned personas, right? But I guess, Nicola, do you have any additional techniques that you might like to mention in terms of how you analyze users and customers?
Yeah, so I've already kind of mentioned the user personas in my previous answer, so I won't go over that. But I think one thing that I really like to use, which is probably, off the back of a user persona, is a story of woe. You use a storytelling technique to understand what their story of woe is, so that you can, again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier, understanding them right up front, understanding what their pain points are and why they want the project as you go forward. I think another thing is, Nick's already touched on the power and interest grid, but one thing that I experimented with a while ago was getting the stakeholders to plot themselves on the power and interest grid. So I already had kind of like a rough idea of where I thought that they sat, and kind of how often the customer wanted to be involved. But I got them to kind of plot on the power interest grid of where they thought they sat, how much power they thought they had, how much interest they thought they had, and based on that, how often they wanted to be communicated with on an individual level. And I mean, everybody said something completely different. Some people said, I definitely have a lot of power and a lot of interest. I want you to update me every half an hour, which resulted in another conversation because you can't update somebody every half an hour. But it was really interesting because you can kind of gauge how a stakeholder works based off of that. So somebody who was actually incredibly important put down that they didn't have a lot of power because everybody's got their own bubble of perception, and to them they didn't have a lot of power because a lot of people sat above them. So yeah, there's a few different tools and techniques that you can use, but normally I just try and do exactly as Matt said, just try and get to know the stakeholder, get to know what they like, get to know what they don't like, the customer, sorry, and make sure that you build that relationship with them as you're going through.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that's a great one to start with that question. And it's interesting because when I do a power interest grid or even the stakeholder race sheet, I always rely on the customer or the client or the stakeholders to tell me where they are.
Oh, really?
I don't assume at all. So I tell them what the impact of them telling me is. So like if they say they are highly engaged and they are highly interested and influential rather, then I say, okay, you do realise that means you're going to be in the regular calls, and if you say you're in the bottom left, as it were, and you're not particularly influential or not particularly interested, then yes, I will keep you informed. I will do a little bit more than that to Nick's last point, but at least they know where they sit and what the implication of it is.
And they can change if they don't want to be involved that much. I'll take a step back.
Well, I said, at least by them, if they're involved in it as well, it gives them an opportunity to tell you, actually, I'm not as influential as I was before. Or maybe I've been promoted, so I'm a little bit more influential, or I've got more free time to be more interested, rather than you have to almost find them. So it's interesting to hear that.
It's interesting because you can monitor, exactly as you said, you can monitor them through the process as well and see if they change and if they've had any kind of peaks of interest or if they're interested in a certain part and not another part. Sorry, I'm quiet now.
That's all right. No, by all means, carry on. It's all really useful stuff. That's for sure. Nick, if I could ask you your opinion as well on techniques.
Well, I suppose we're here to talk about customers and end users. So customers can be internal customers, but they can also be external customers as well, which we haven't talked about that much yet. But a lot of the techniques that I like to use and approaches that I like to use are ones that are mostly associated with dealing with situations where you can't get to know the customers because, you know, they're at arm's length, they're outside the organization. You can't just drop by their desk and have a coffee with them just like that. So, you know, there's a whole range of things that you can do there. I mean, it starts with understanding who they are, you know, understanding who your customers are, what are they like, in all sorts of ways, you know. I mean, basic things like demographics and so on, but more importantly, what are the problems that they have? Why might they be interested in using the thing that you're doing for them? Um, how might they go about using things? How do they solve problems at the moment, etc., etc. Um, and then it's about getting out of the building and going to actually study some of those people. So that's one thing that I find that business analysts very often don't get permission to do, so to speak. We're not expected by the people who run the business analysis function or by our business sponsors or whoever it might be to be doing that stuff. But I think it's really important to insist on doing it because you have to have that realistic understanding of what your customers are like. So you need to go and spend time observing people. So it's all those observation techniques that we know about as business analysts. You know, we were just talking about shadowing, for example. I mean, that's a great example. Um, and focus on understanding people. So you know, we mentioned personas a couple of times, and a persona is great, but I think it's really important to remember what you're trying to do is achieve an understanding rather than produce a document and say, look, here's my persona description. It's about actually understanding who the people are, what are the problems they've got, what are the pain points, what are the things that they want, and so on. And incidentally, not to go on to another completely different subject, that's one reason why I don't think artificial intelligence is nearly as useful to people as a lot of people are saying it is at the moment, because it might help you create a document, but it doesn't help you understand anything very much, in my opinion. But if you think about personas as a way of summarizing the understanding you've got, I think they're great. Another thing that I like to produce is an empathy map. I think empathy maps are a really, really nice way of putting on, you know, one piece of flip chart paper or whatever it is, a whole load of information about what it's like to be one of the end users, or what it's like to be one of the customers. So those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, definitely a few to take away there as well. I mean, on my side, at these sessions, I always learn a technique or about a technique or hear about a technique I haven't heard from for a while. And empathy maps, I've certainly heard of them, and I know I haven't used them for a while, so I might have to dust one of those off, Nick, to see how they are. And it's quite interesting as well. When you make the point around AI, and I think, yeah, for me, I mean, using AI is a really good way in general, as an example, is a really good way to free up time, so you can spend more time speaking to the end user and the customers and your stakeholders as well. Matt, of course, just give you the opportunity to talk about techniques. So, if you would please.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think Nicola and Nick made some really good points there. Thank you. I think one of the things that's really interesting, actually, that Nick was saying, and one of the things I can relate to myself is certain times when I've been through RFI, RFQ, RFP processes, is actually about trying to know your audience, because you don't know those customers at all, and actually making sure that you understand who you're going to be talking to and what the relevant skills are in the room means that you can come armed with your big brother. You know, you can bring along the expert in your business who understands the tech stack. And really, that's about, as much as knowing what your customer needs, that's about knowing your team and knowing who can answer the right question at the right time. As you know, as BAs, we love getting involved in pretty much everything, but we don't always know the right answer at the right time. And when you've got a critical piece of work to try and get over the line, often it's better to be able to answer and talk quite freely in a meeting, and actually being able to facilitate that is quite a power skill, I find. Actually being able to ask the silly question at the right time of the right person can start a conversation that can lead us to the final solution or requirement quite quickly. So I think for me, that's a really good technique that you can use, is actually just being able to put the right people in the right place at the right time. I think that's a really key skill.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think on that note as well, I mean, certainly what resonates with me, and Nick touched on it as well, is when you think about your customers and your client, it's important to think about their clients and their customers as well. So, some of us as consultants, we are dealing with internal customers who are delivering for external customers of theirs. And it can quite often be useful to get in front of the clients of your client to find out what it is they actually need as well. And as I talk about that, I also think about that similar example where sometimes as BAs, we might interface with a product owner, and the product owner might interact with the business. Certainly in both the situations, it's perfectly permissible for the BA to ask to be able to express the benefit of speaking to the end user or to the customers, and to ask to be involved, and to ask to be able to put questions directly to those end users so they can get some first-hand information, or maybe ask some further questions off the back of it as well. So it's certainly between you sort of triggered that thought anyway, and that correlation to both the internal and the external interaction. I guess as we sort of talk about the techniques we've used and some of the information we're gathering from our stakeholders and our customers, Nick, I'll start with you, if I may, first, in terms of what approaches that you tend to use to be able to prioritise the needs of certain customers or end users, perhaps over others. I'll leave it as general as that.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different angles to that. I suppose the first thing to say is you're going to have stakeholders. You've always got stakeholders who have got opinions about things. And I like to some extent, leave it up to them to argue about the priorities of things. Having said that, I think that the most useful thing about having those discussions about prioritization is having the discussion, because you learn more about what it is that you're doing, and the sort of the vision that you've got, if you like, for why does this solution solve this problem, and so on. Just by trying to nail it down to priorities and talk about the business benefit of things and so on. But having said that, what I like to do when I'm doing a project where we're delivering a solution is really focus more on trying to come up with a plan for incrementally delivering something that's going to be coherent, a number of different deliveries, each of which is actually going to do something that makes sense, and it all hangs together and it all works. So you're not necessarily doing things strictly according to the priorities that the business case would suggest. You're doing it in terms of actually producing a thing that is going to work. I think that's probably the most important thing I'd say about that.
Yeah, and it certainly gives us makes me think as well about the role of the BA in seeing all these potential solutions and how they come together to form the larger solution, and ultimately that chain of things that will deliver the value to the clients and customers as well. Nicola, if I could ask you that similar question, please.
Yeah, of course. I think
prioritize.
I completely agree with everything that Nick said. You've got to make sure that you're prioritizing the customer needs, and I think normally the way that I would do that sort of in a day-to-day role is, if you're dealing with sort of an external customer, for example, you would run through the priorities of the requirements. You'd include them, but you'd include the benefits of prioritizing those requirements over anything internal. So that could be reputational. It could be reputational. It could be monetary value. It could literally be anything, but it's making sure that we're building those relationships to last. So, I mean, you can do that in sort of a number of ways. One way I've done it previously is you get everybody into a room. You say, okay, cool, you've got theoretically, or you've got £100 to spend. These are 20 requirements. How will you split them? And you'll find that depending on a person's role, it depends on which their priority is. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, everybody has a bubble of perception. So the data analyst will always go for the data requirements, and the customer will always go for their requirements. And it's making sure that in that meeting you can kind of battle between everybody and come to a conclusion. But again, as business analysts, we generally can kind of lead from behind almost and stating the benefits. So when you're doing if you're producing a user story in this so that column, you can literally write so that the external customer remains happy, or has that trust, or and we're keeping them on board. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's making sure that when we're writing those benefits, that the end customer is the goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. Matt?
So you'll not be surprised to hear that for me, this is all about data-driven. I love data. I think not taking away from customer interaction, we should always be going out and speaking to customers. But when we get that information back in and we're relatively comfortable with it, I love using a tool called RICE. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before. It's a tool that we use to effectively prioritize items against each other using a metric scoring system. So it works upon the basis of the reach, how many people will be reached through the changing of something, what will be the impact to the business, how confident are we of that change, and then you take those three scores and divide them by the effort, and from this you get a relative scoring matrix. And it's by far and away not a perfect system. It comes with many challenges. First challenge that comes to mind is people always arguing about the metrics and how the different scoring systems work and come together, which again are not perfect. But if you run everything through the same scoring system, you're left with a list of prioritized items. And if you've got 5 items at the top of that list scoring very highly, you know that those 5 are important, and you take them back to the people, the customers, who then will help you decide. But you also know that the 10 or 15 things that you've got at the bottom aren't as important as those, based upon the analysis that you've done. And it's just about validating all of those things and ideas to make sure that you've come up with the right thing. I'll always go back to data. I think it's the best thing in the background to validate thinking up front.
And I think to that point, Matt, that it's, you want your users to be confident in the prioritization process, and if it is actually data driven rather than emotive, then at least every user can feel like they have a chance of fairly representing the situation and resulting in, if their problem is truly more important than others, that it will be dealt with. And I think that RICE methodology that you outlined, the fact there's a few different dimensions to it to think about, like the impact being one, I think it feels like it's a consistent approach that's thorough, and it can apply across the board, so people can actually feel a bit confident about the approach.
It helps ideas to come from the bottom up as well as the top down, I find. So
yeah. And I mean, the only thing I would really add to the excellent points you've made is really just to make sure we put the focus on what is the value of the thing that we're putting forward, rather than the emotions, which actually aligns quite nicely with what Matt was saying. I think the other I guess perspective I sometimes put on this is to say that if we think about the good of the organisation or the good of the customer, that might typically allow us to decide one option over another, as well, because we can certainly think of the organisation as a customer to some degree of our analysis. I think feels like, as we're thinking about the customer, we want to make sure that we're in tune with what they want. Customers, like people, they are people generally, will have an opinion that can change. So therefore, how do we, the question is around how we ensure continual awareness and improvement around our interactions with the customer, to make sure as their needs change, that we are aware of it, and actually how we can react to it and adjust the the information given to those providing the solution. And I wonder, perhaps Nicola, if I could start with you on that one, please. Oh, you're on mute there, Nicola.
Of course I am. Sorry, somebody was
By the
mowing the
way,
lawn
Nicola, sorry,
outside.
Nick, just to let you know, Nick, you're the only one who hasn't left himself on mute yet. So just so you know, you've only got one more question to do so.
Somebody was mowing the lawn outside, so I thought better of it, and then they stopped and I forgot to unmute. Sorry about that. So when we're trying to get kind of that continuous feedback, I mean, I could prattle on about it all day, but if you've managed to build that open and transparent relationship with your customers, if anything does change, they have the confidence that they can come to you and they can tell you that there is an issue or that something's changed or there's a priority shift, and they have the confidence that you'll take the right action off the back of that. But if you've not had kind of the opportunity to do that, or they're not the kind of stakeholder who would, or customer, sorry, who would want to tell you that, something that I found is having regular drop-in sessions with the end customers generally works quite well, because they know that they have that forum and that safe place that if they want updates, or if they have anything that's changed, or if they just need to talk to you about something that's going on in the project world, then they have that drop-in session where they can do that. And I think that works really well, because like I said, it's building that transparency with them and saying, if you have got any problems and you do need them sorting, or we need to readjust something, there is this hour time slot every 2 weeks or every month that you can drop into. I will be there if you want to. And they know that something's going to happen off the back of that. And I think that it's just, again, like I said, I can prattle on about it all day, but making sure that you've got that trust so that your project is ultimately successful is really important.
Yeah. And making yourself available as a business analyst is a really good way of starting building that trust and helping them end users and customers realizing that you are there for their benefit rather than you're there to tick a box as well. Yeah. So I really like that point about drop-in sessions as another way to make yourself more available. Yeah, excellent. Matt.
Yeah, no, agree, Nicola. And I get a lot of that through demoing. So when we go into demoing what functionality has been built, you often find that you get customers who are very open and frank in those sessions and give you a lot of information. But the key for a good business analysis skill here is to look out for people who are not making a lot of noise. Are they distracted? Are they not happy with the product? Are they not happy to talk in front of their peers? And actually, you can take those people to side and have a chat one-to-one and try and find out and get a bit of a feedback loop from them going on as well, and actually feed that information back into the group in a way that everybody can hear the feedback, but they don't have to vocalize it. After all, we're all very different. We don't all like speaking up in front of a big group. So that can often help. So good observation skills are really key during some of those demo sessions.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Nick, your perspective, please.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, definitely. And I think also if you're part of a project team, it's really about the mindset. So, going back decades to projects I used to do, waterfall projects that I used to do in the 1980s and so on, the mindset was typically, look, we've got this thing to build, let's just get it built. Thankfully, these days, people have got the message pretty much that if you take a more iterative approach to your development, and if you take an incremental approach to your delivery, that actually gives you the opportunity to seek out that feedback and make an active effort to find out, is this thing going to work or not? Because ultimately that should be the focus of what you're trying to do. It shouldn't, your focus shouldn't be, let's get this thing built. Your focus should be, is this thing going to work or not? Let's try and find out ways it's not going to work, because there will be problems with it. There will be ways in which it doesn't quite fit in with people's mental models or the way that they like to do things, as we were discussing before. Let's find those things out as soon as we possibly can. I think that's the sort of mindset that we want to be in, really. And if you're doing incremental delivery, you can try and plan it. I like to think of it as a series of experiments, really. Each version of the thing that you deliver, whether it's a piece of software or it's a new process or whatever it might be, think of it as an experiment. Think, what are we trying to learn here? You know, what are the risks that we're trying to, the uncertainties that we're trying to eliminate here? What are the biggest things that might go wrong? And let's see if we can see if they do go wrong or not. And another way of doing that is I absolutely agree with about the demos, but to take it a step further, you can do usability testing. If you've got a prototype, you can do usability testing of it, and actually get the people who are going to be using it to try using it to do something, and that's the the proof of the pudding, really, isn't it? If they can use it, then it's probably okay.
Yeah, not treating it as that, as you said, as sort of like that one time fits all, just get a delivery over the line, forget about it, thinking about it as actually this is one step or another step in their journey to actually getting some improvement in their way of working or their products or their delivery. Yeah, I really like that point, Nick. And it touches as well on challenges, because there is one of the key challenges we often face as BAs is trying to satisfy the demands of hitting the deadline with demands of actually trying to deliver the right product for the end users. And it does obviously introduces there has to be a balance, of course, but it's no good hitting the deadline with something that is just not fit for purpose. Often it's probably more appropriate to take a slight delay and then deliver something that's truly valuable to the customer and the end user, because it will certainly return much more in the long run. Wondering in that vein, I'll ask Matt if there are any additional challenges to what Nick called upon there in terms of the end user or customer focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you just touched on it there as well. I think project fatigue is a really big thing, right? When you go through any large scale project, you will find that your end users will have requested something maybe 3 years ago, and whether you've gone through waterfall or agile, it doesn't really matter. The concept was born a long time ago, and whether the concept has evolved so that you end up with a really useful solution, or you end up with something that was created 3 years ago, waiting for something when you really need it is really frustrating. So end user focus and project fatigue is really hard to manage. You need really good change management skills, and this is why you need to keep those users involved throughout the process. Really ensure that they're there every part of the way, they understand what you're doing and why, and when you get blockers, it's about talking to them about those things. I think alongside that, it's not just project fatigue. You'll have regulatory change, you'll have other changes that will happen during these projects. And again, it's about trying to keep your stakeholders on track and make them see that the end is in sight, and show them that through regularly demoing the changes that you've made.
Yeah. And actually, if there's that focus as well on that project fatigue, or at least that awareness of it, I think as BAs, we're actually in a really good place most of the time to identify some quick or short-term wins that can alleviate some pressure in the short term, while perhaps it might take a little bit longer for the more advanced solutions as well.
Yeah, now, one of the things I wanted to say earlier on, which didn't quite get in, is that by having great stakeholder relationships, you are the king of the workaround. We can quite often get people to do manual solutions that are not fit for purpose, they don't want to do, but they'll take the pain for a little bit longer if they can see that the goods are coming. And it's a skill in its own right to be able to implement that.
That's it, absolutely. And just to end on that topic, and actually probably the BAInsights as well, Nicola, just a question to you on additional challenges if there are.
I think one of the additional challenges that I've found when it comes to end users is that not everybody thinks about the end users you're going through your project. So of course, everybody kind of gets wrapped up in their own needs, and occasionally you'll find that as a project, as you're going through a project as a BA, you've constantly got to say, will this actually be usable? Will the customer like this? We had this feedback. Is this still being enacted? Because you can get so caught up in the back end workings of a system, for example, that stakeholders sometimes forget that you've actually got to think about what the front end journey is going to look like, what the process flow through that is like, rather than just this feature works. So I think that's probably one of the key struggles that you'll find on a day-to-day. But as BAs, we know that we need to think about the end user. We know that we need to make sure that all the benefits you capture right at the start and all the engagement you do right at the start has to flow throughout the process. And it's just about reminding the people that you're working with that's there and it exists for a reason, and reminding them about the benefits that you're going to get out of that as you flow through the project, so that you can see it right to fruition.
Brilliant. And it's a nice way of bringing the conversation full circle to make sure that not only we are thinking about the end user, but if we identify anybody in the team that isn't, so that we can give them a little nudge to think about the end user as well. Because effectively, as a BA, as we said before, we are the spokesperson for the stakeholders that we work with and the clients that we work with as well. So we should use that responsibility wisely, I would say. We're going to end there before I get into sermon mode. But I should say thank you to each of you for your insights and for sparing the time. Definitely valuable and insightful, and as usual, some interesting and I'm sure very wise tips as well throughout the way. So thank you very much. I'll certainly look forward to hearing from you and seeing you on the global BA circuit as it is. But yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
Thanks, Nicola.